Oh, BookTube. Let's chat through some recent reads. I just want to say that any books mentioned on this channel, they always get very good homes. So the one of them is about activist law within South Africa. I obviously do that for a living, and so that book is sitting happily on my work bookshelf. My colleagues are delighted, and they'll get to it as soon as they can. This next one is called As by Fire by Jonathan Jansen. And when my mother in law saw me reading this, she went, "Oh, Jonathan Jansen!" Because he's a very prominent public intellectual within South Africa. He's visited schools across the country, and so obviously the book's going to my in laws. I obviously fell in love with my fiance, like, that's the person that I'm marrying, but it was also love at first sight with my in laws. They love reading, they are just, I feel such a sense of belonging with them, and it's fantastic. The book that I'm currently reading is The Trouble with Africa, Why Foreign Aid Isn't Working, and that's by Robert Calderisi. That's sitting at work at the moment. And it's by someone who worked within the World Bank for 20 years and who traveled across Africa for 20 years as well. So he's very grounded in economic reality, also cultural, social reality of African people, very measured. And the more I read of this book, I was just so joyful about it. I contacted this man on LinkedIn and thanked him personally for writing it because I'm just finding it so fantastic. So I work under the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and so the World Bank is also a branch of the United Nations, and so it's a very similar mission that we are working towards. So I thanked him on LinkedIn. He even replied. He said, "Oh, thank you so much. Like, I'm glad that you found it meaningful and impactful." The book was written almost 20 years ago, but he senses that other people still find it relevant because he has been asked to translate it into Korean, because South Korea has also helped Africa quite a lot. And that call for translation has happened within very recent years. I'm not finished that book. I'm really savoring it, and obviously I've left it at work because I have work books and home books and a book in my bag, and that that kind of thing. Life of a reader. So yeah, I'm finding that book fantastic. I'm also going to do just a little bit of a mini haul here because this is only 3 books, and it's just to give you an overview of where my reading is at this point in time. So as you may know, I'm doing a Reading Africa project, and so I've been looking at secondhand bookshops, just Googling, going on Goodreads, reading reviews all over online, and just seeing what piques my interest. So this one is called When a Crocodile Eats the Sun, and this is by Peter Godwin, and it's about Zimbabwe, basically. Peter Godwin, an award winning writer, is on assignment in Zululand when he is summoned by his mother to Zimbabwe, his birthplace. His father is seriously ill. She fears he is dying. Godwin finds his country, once a post colonial success story, descending into a vortex of violence and racial hatred. And this talks about his father recovers, but over the next few years Godwin travels regularly between his family life in Manhattan and the increasing chaos of Zimbabwe, with its rampant inflation and land seizures making famine a very real prospect. I've heard a lot of first-hand stories from people struggling with this. It is against this backdrop that Godwin discovers a 50-year-old family secret, one which changes everything he thought he knew about his father and his own place in the world. So I think this sounded very fascinating to me because I've heard lots of different accounts of Zimbabwe. From black Zimbabweans, there's Shona and Ndebele. I'm not really sure what the power dynamic is there, but I know that Ndebele people integrate into South Africa a lot easier, and specifically KwaZulu Natal, because Ndebele is very close to isiZulu. And if I'm not mistaken, Ndebele is also an official language of South Africa. So that for them the integration is a lot easier. For Shona people it's not, because Shona is vastly different linguistically, and culturally as well. That integration is a lot less fluid. The other thing with white Zimbabweans within South Africa, they are very readily accepted in a social sense because in South Africa, and I'm going to offend people by this, but white and Indian South Africans, we don't really have our identity questioned in the same way that black people do. Like, let me just say it. It's fine. It's fine. You can fight with me in the comments. So yeah, there was a lot of violence within Zimbabwe. Obviously, within groups like Shona and Ndebele, I did hear about conflict regarding that, and also that there were like insurgencies and rebels going and murdering white farmers in front of their eyes. And obviously, this became a huge thing on the world stage. And Robert Mugabe had a lot of policies that were very contentious. There's a lot of that in terms of the political macrocosm. However, this book doesn't only deal with that, it also deals with the personal history. And to me, it sounds like a very human story, which I think is fantastic because obviously there is a political reality, but this brings a human face to it, which to me is what is interesting. This next book on the whole is Clarion Call Struggle for a Better Lesotho, a collection of speeches by His Majesty King Moshoeshoe II, 1976 to 1989. I'm like looking so excited about this book because I genuinely am excited. I was looking at the map of Africa and saying to my fiance, no, I can't handle all this. And he was pointing out, oh, but why don't you read that book? That's by a Basotho woman. And I went, no, man. She leaves Lesotho and becomes a domestic worker within South Africa. I'm like, no, Lesotho is like known, is maybe looked upon quite disparagingly by South Africans. It's like, oh, Lesotho is part of South Africa, you know. There's this kind of arrogance that, no, Lesotho belongs to us as South Africans, you know. Oh, Namibia was part of South Africa. Hi. Military occupation, but that's really a terrible thing to say. So, you know, I view Lesotho as its own sovereign entity with its own people, its own culture, its own history. Yes, they integrate very well into South Africa, but they also have their own perspective. And I wanted to hear that perspective. And my fiance said, oh, you're going to struggle to get a book about that. Psych! Okay, so yes, I have found a book that I want. And I did flip through his speeches, and he talks about how, you know, yeah, self-determination, sovereignty as Basotho, that kind of thing. This links to my previous video. So, Great South African Teachers, a tribute to South Africa's great teachers from the people whose lives they have changed, by Jonathan Jansen. And this is someone who's worked within education in South Africa for a very long time. I just think that this is fascinating. I love Jonathan Jansen. I find him to be very measured. He looks at so many different sides and layers to issues because it's so easy to look at simple solutions and say, oh, but we need more science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education in South Africa. Oh, we need more STEM. Jonathan Jansen will look and he'll say, okay, what does that mean? We need to create numeracy skills. We need to create literacy skills. Where does that start? That starts obviously at a very young age for people, and basic education within South Africa. What is the duty of government? What is the duty of the private sector and NGOs? Government obviously has to create a curriculum that is developmentally appropriate in terms of psychological milestones and educational psychology. However, we've got such rampant inequality and poverty within South Africa where people don't have basic nutrition. They don't have, you know, these pit latrines. So the toilets and sanitation within schools and rural roads are so bad that children are not able to reach these developmental milestones within the rural areas, whereas in the more rich areas, people would be able to surpass those developmental milestones. How do we create an education system within South Africa that is unified given such socioeconomic inequalities? Jonathan Jansen would look at that in a very measured way. He's not pushing any particular political agenda or anything like that. He just genuinely cares about education, which I think is something so fantastic about him. So yeah, these are the books that I have been reading. I've sent them out to other people who will enjoy them. This is a small haul, and yeah, that's where my reading is at the moment.